Welcome to Story in a Bottle. I'm your host, Dan Maccarone. Each episode, our guests are leading voices in tech, media, and entertainment. And to get to know them better, we share their favorite cocktails as they share their stories.
We don't often think about cancer and sexual wellness going hand in hand. But for Polly Rodriguez, her journey to founding the company Unbound contains both. Over Bullet Bourbon Old Fashions, Polly talks about being diagnosed with cancer while in college, how that led to her realization that the sex toy industry falls short in satisfying women, the broken system of healthcare policy in Washington, and how working in a dating startup led to her role as a founder focused on helping women learn and experience their best and healthiest sexual identity.
Cheers.
Thanks for coming on.
Oh my
Great
God,
to meet
yeah.
you.
Good to meet you too. Any friend of Dave's is a friend of mine.
We love Dave Renz on
Yeah.
Story in a Bottle and the Charming Robot and in life in general. One of the friendliest people, as we were talking about before, that we know. What are we drinking? Let's talk about that first.
Old fashioned.
What Buffalo Trace Old Fashioned?
Buffalo Trace old fashioned.
We've only had 2 sips.
I know.
Let's not get crazy yet. So you mentioned before we got on, like your mom's from the South, and you grew up with a lot of bourbon.
Yeah.
And so does that track into your childhood? Like, where do we?
We started drinking at age 5. No, I'm just kidding. No, I have a very Southern grandparents on my mom's side from Tallahassee, Florida, and my grandmother would always say that she always had Old Granddaddy around, which is like a very, very old whiskey.
Yeah.
And she'd be like, "Old Granddaddy's our family's best friend," and I'd be like, "Okay, all right." But as a little kid, I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of bourbon and a lot of Four Roses.
Four Roses is great. I love Four Roses.
Like just very Southern bourbon, a lot of mint juleps growing up. So yeah, just Southern on one side and then Hispanic on the other.
Okay. Well, I feel like that makes for a good ability to drink.
Yeah, a lot of yelling in our household for sure.
Brothers and sisters, or just the parents?
Mostly it's just two very different cultures that come together.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was good. We grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, which also was a very random place.
Smack dab in the middle of the country.
Yeah.
So you are a co-founder of this company called Unbound, which did Dave Renz also co-found this, or he was involved somehow?
So Unbound, this is so fun. It was so fun to explain during like venture capital pitching. But Unbound has, like many startups, a very colorful past where there were 5 friends that originally started working on it, I think all the way back in 2012.
Okay.
Dave Renz was one of them. And they worked on it part-time from like 2012 to 2014. And I met the group in 2014, which wasn't the original group. It was a very like smaller version of the original founders.
Okay. So for listeners who don't know what Unbound is, how would you describe it?
Unbound is a sexual wellness company. We design and manufacture over 30 vibrators, lubricants, and accessories. And we sell those on our website, direct to consumer, but we also sell them in retail locations like Ulta and Urban Outfitters and Revolve. And then we also sadly had to get on Amazon this year. So our goal is really to take an industry that's like operated in the shadows for a very long time, mainstream.
And so you tried to get on Amazon? You did not get on Amazon?
Oh, no, we got on Amazon. I just have such a love-hate relationship with it.
Okay.
You know?
Is Amazon, like I've never searched for a sex toy on Amazon.
They don't make it easy.
I'm sure they don't. I was going to ask, like, how discoverable are you on Amazon?
Not that discoverable. I mean, the thing that's crazy is Amazon does, I would venture to guess, because they don't obviously publish this information, but sex toy is the 44th most searched term on all of Amazon across all keywords. And when you think about the fact that 90% of like millennials and Gen Z start there, if you're looking for like an actual physical product, they all start on Amazon. So when you think about the fact that the 44th, any physical product, it's way superseded Google. So the fact that sex toys rank so highly, they're probably doing at least $3 to $4 billion a year in the category, but they don't let you advertise. You can't do sponsored, promotions or anything like that. And so it's made it very difficult to actually make your brand discoverable on Amazon.
Huh. And do you have like certain products that you make that you target for an Amazon customer versus a customer that would come directly to you guys or other vendors?
That's such a good question. We haven't, because historically we haven't, but I think we're learning quickly that our direct-to-consumer customer is not, like, our direct-to-consumer customer is generally Gen Z. I think in retail, it tends to be a little more mixed, but Gen Z and millennial. On Amazon, our current customer is a lot older. They're actually between like 40 and 55, which is new for us, because I think our brand, for direct-to-consumer, because advertising is very difficult for this category and very censored. And so most of our growth has come from organic social media on TikTok and Instagram. And with Amazon, it's been kind of difficult to navigate, to figure out, like, that customer's a lot more price sensitive, and generally, I think, less brand motivated. Like, there's less brand affiliation, and so you're really competing against a lot of the really cheap products that exist, which, because the category isn't regulated by the FDA, is also like high risk, because these are products you're using in a really absorbent part of your body that more often than not are coming from manufacturers that aren't disclosing, like, what's actually in this that I'm using on my body.
Yeah, it would seem to me that, and this is probably ill-informed of me, but like going the cheap route with a sex toy or a vibrator would be less good, for lack of a better term. Like,
but you don't know.
I don't mean just from a pleasure standpoint, but from a quality of the device or whatever.
But I don't think the average person, I think if we were to ask anyone on this bar right now,
Yeah.
like, what is a toxin you would look to avoid if you were to buy a vibrator? I mean, I didn't know until I got into the industry. Like, I don't know what to look for. And if the FDA doesn't regulate it, like, there's no oversight. So I think it's mostly customers on Amazon are just looking for convenience and really, you know, like, competitive pricing. And they don't know that maybe this product has, to answer the posed question, like phthalates or parabens or things that are known to potentially be like carcinogenic.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tough because it's very difficult to compete with. I mean, 65% of all the suppliers on Amazon are from China. So what's happening is a lot of the manufacturers who historically the industry has worked with to, like, design and make vibrators, dildos, all these things, are now just listing the products directly on Amazon. And it's, you know, if you're a brand, it's really difficult to compete with the pricing that they can put out there.
I mean, do people, I mean, and I don't, maybe this varies by age. Like, are people looking for, when they're looking on Amazon, for example, or maybe not on, when they're coming to you guys, like, are they looking for different things from, like, a vibrator from Amazon versus a vibrator or dildo from you guys or someone else?
I don't know. The answer is I don't know, because one of the things that's so fascinating about this industry is, like, there's no data.
Right.
Like, all we have is, like, the Kinsey Institute, which, like, Indiana is pulling their funding because, like, the government's crazy right now around anything sexual.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, there's no data, and even the data you do get more often than not is, like, biased or skewed, or, like, you know, you ask people in surveys, like, how often are you having sex? And, like, they'll come back and be like 10 times a week. And you're like, okay, but, like, really? Is that, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's really difficult to build products when you don't really have a ton of data. And so I think what's been really interesting about the industry that's shifted in the last, like, 5 to 10 years is you finally have, like, women, femme, non-binary, the people who are using the products are now designing them, which historically wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And so they have a little bit more intuition around, like, what do these products actually need to do from a hardware perspective that, like, makes them effective and innovative, which I think is still, like, very, like, immature. Like, the industry itself is very nascent in the sense that, like, you look at any other industry and you look at the fact that the internet's built on the back of porn.
Right.
And, like, the hardware, still, there's so much room to, like, innovate and create. And
innovation starts in porn almost exclusively,
right,
you know, and in digital, from the DVD on, maybe from VHS on, I don't even know, but for sure.
For sure. Even, like, I saw an article this week that the new what's the Apple?
Oh, the VR thing they're doing?
Yeah. The $3,000, $4,000 headset that they have has like really strict barriers around pornographic content. Now, the people that are buying them, who are the really early adopters, are trying to hack it.
Of course they are.
But it's so
because who do you think the early adopters of this technology
but
is?
it's so fascinating because, like, so much of technology has been accelerated by sex. And yet there's this really inherent conflict between, like, Apple's very strict about what's allowed in the App Store, and, like, same with Android and Google and, like, all of these policies on Facebook. Like, any platform, they're so conservative around what they will and won't allow. And yet, like, it is sex more often than not that facilitated their existence in one way or another.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, and this country is notoriously puritanical around sex and teaching sex and or sex education. I mean, and I mean, I wonder, you mentioned like Gen Z being your largest demographic. What I'm going to ask this question, and it does not, I don't mean it like to come across as like glib. Like, what are they looking for? Not because they shouldn't be sex. I mean, I don't know a single woman that has not at least bought one vibrator in her life. You know what I mean? Like, that's like.
Yeah, but you live in like a cool place. Like, you live in New York City or
No,
from
that's true.
Boston. Like,
Yeah.
I grew up in Missouri where you didn't talk about those things. You were considered devious if you like owned a product like that. So I think what's really interesting about sex is the cultural norms are so specific, not only to generation, but also to like geography and culture and where you grew up. But Gen Z is fascinating. Gen Z, I want to say 20% identify as LGBTQIA, which is, I mean, I think for millennials, it's around 8 to 10%, but for baby boomers, it's like 2%. I think Gen X is around like 4 to 6. Don't quote me on these stats because, that's what I remember. But like, they're very sexually educated and aware and like certainly self-aware. But when you look at the stats around like sexual activity, like they're having less sex than any of the generations before them. And there are a lot of hypotheses as to why. But it's I think like our company exists, or at least fundamentally I believe it exists, because I do think that like people should masturbate. I think it's good for you. I think it like allows especially young people to figure out what feels good to them so that when they do have partnered sex, they're able to like have better sex and communicate about that in a way that's like informed. But it's just interesting to see what shifts with each generation. And I think technology plays such a massive role in that.
Oh, for sure. But even in education, like the government, and this, we don't need to get too super political here, but I feel like the government is reducing the access to good quality
100%.
sex education. And so with people in Gen Z who are people in their 20s, I guess, right now, is that right?
Yeah, which is crazy to think about, right?
Yeah.
Because you're like, in my head, I'm like, oh, if you were born in 2000, you're like, I don't know, 15 years old. And you're like, no, like you're 24.
Right. So, I mean, they're clearly, finding information elsewhere, which, I'm sure the government would hate to admit, because obviously they're trying to block any access to those, useful things. That's not entirely fair, but,
No, but it's true. Only 13 states in the U.S. are legally required to have medically and scientifically, factually accurate sex ed, which is like extrapolate to any other subject. Like history, only 13 states require it to be actually true.
Right.
Like
well, that might be true, actually, in history.
Well, yeah, but like math, I mean, like stuff that's like, it's and most of them now are, not most, that's not fair, but like increasingly more states are teaching abstinence only. And, Obama put a lot of great funding behind sexual education and improving in the country. And then Trump revoked all of that. I think he passed a bill that said the U.S. government would only really like fund abstinence only sex ed. So there has been this huge kind of backlash. And I think politically, even looking on the national stage right now, there's so much talk about the sexualization of children, which I think is true when you look at social media platform. Like the stats are undeniable about like the impact on mental health and what's happening.
Absolutely.
But our country refuses to do nuance. You know what I mean? Like, it's like our reaction to that is there can't be any content.
Right.
Instead of like, well, can we figure out a better way to decipher like educational accurate content, helpful content from, pedophilia and like hypersexualization of like young girls. And it's a complicated problem that I feel like a lot of the social media platforms aren't ready or willing to be.
No, they kind of do an all or nothing thing.
Yeah.
And like I have friends of mine who are artists, and they do a lot of figure drawing or paintings, and a lot of those paintings are of nude people. And it's a fine line on what they're allowed to post to social media, even though they have fairly large followings. And,
even though Da Vinci did it.
Da Vinci did it,
I mean? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like the greatest art in the world is of the human form.
Right, correct, yeah. So I go back to these Gen Z people, and I think to myself, are they getting a better education about sex because of their access to the internet and because of the lack of education in school? And I'll give you like I have no I haven't thought about this until just now, so I'm just kind of
Yeah.
curious. Like I'm a Gen Xer, and like I definitely like had a weird sex ed experience in high school or middle school because I went to an all boys Catholic school, and
Oh yeah, that
Yeah.
was probably not great.
it was great. We had our sex ed book was called Becoming a Man, and it was written by a priest.
No.
Oh yes.
No.
Oh yes. So good.
Written by a man that literally is not allowed to have sex.
Correct. And the conversations were not really helpful in class, and
Or informative. Yeah.
or and obviously not encouraging. And the idea that masturbation would be okay, like forget that. Like you would never bring that up, And so and there was no internet, and so it's an interesting thing to think about, like where you so like my generation, and I don't know how old you are, so my generation like is having more sex than people who are learning about it from the technology that can display that for them in better or worse ways.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really fascinating is so much of sex ed today comes from porn.
That's
And
kind of what I was getting
porn-
at.
No, yeah. I mean, it's undeniable. But what is really peculiar about porn, which is consistent with this theme of like institutional denial that sex exists, is that it's free. And so if it's free, like YouTube, like anything, what do the algorithms do? They go to the most extreme forms of content to get the most views, to capitalize on traffic. And so I think porn has become the de facto sex ed.
Mhm.
But I think what's really sad and unfortunate is like it's so not reflective of what most people's sex lives look like and
Sure.
are.
Yeah.
And so I think what has happened, unfortunately, is that Gen Z and now Gen Alpha is exposed to sex education that is just like also wildly inaccurate, but in just like a totally different way,
Right. Yeah.
And the stats show this. I mean, the stats around like young kids having like anal sex and just like sexual proclivities and what they're engaging in is just kind of sometimes shocking because you're like, well, I didn't even know that was I mean, I remember the first time I found out about like what it was like to feel someone up in like 7th or 8th grade. And I was like,
Yeah.
wait, what? They do, you know what I mean? Where
That's the Midwestern in you, I think.
but
I don't
it's
know.
also like it was I was born in 1986. So I was like, I got access to the internet when I was like the end of 8th grade, freshman year of high school, when
Mhm.
like you're first starting to like discover all those things, and certainly did not have access to porn. Didn't even know that existed.
Yeah.
And so now the average age that someone like a kid is first watches or is exposed to porn more often than not on accident is 8 years old.
8 years old.
Yeah. Because like
Wow.
think about it, 1 out of every 3 searches on the internet is related to sex, more often than not pornography. So that's 33% of all internet traffic,
Yeah. That makes, yeah.
right? I
You
mean,
break
it's
it down.
usually a very short session time, like it's 10 minutes or under. But
I'm not sure what that says either, but
it's funny because we've tried to advertise on some of the porn websites because
Yeah.
it's so cheap. Like it's like 0.00, like
Right.
it's free pretty
Yeah.
much. But there's 0% conversion because people are going to those sites to do one thing and one thing
For sure,
only. They're
for
not
sure.
being like, oh, what's this banner ad for a nice like organic lubricant? Like, no, they're not interested in that. But yeah, the whole porn industry is fascinating. Like, how do you monetize it? How do you get people to pay for it? Like, how do you get people to appreciate the content when there's so much free stuff out there, you
right,
know?
right. Well, I think this all comes back to how you describe Unbound, which is as a sexual wellness company. It's not just, you're not just saying, hey, we make sex toys. You're saying, we are about the health and wellness and the maybe comfortability, maybe a good word too. I don't know with this. And one of the things I think you mentioned before is that people who are of the newer generations are the ones making some of these toys now too.
Yes.
Is that true in your team as well?
Yeah, I mean, my co-founder and I are like the oldest people on our team, and I think it's really interesting because historically the industry was very family owned and operated, and was historically really closely, like I'm talking about the adult sex toy industry, and was very closely correlated to alcohol. And quite frankly, like Italian old families that during Prohibition made a lot of money doing
you mean how like alcohol has often been family owned the way that
so those industries are really correlated,
Yeah.
where it'd be like during Prohibition, they were importing alcohol and they were importing smut films.
right
And
right,
for a very long time, those like very robust Italian family networks, all these businesses were owned and operated. It's really fascinating. And I learned all this only when I got into the industry. And you know, when you think about the fact that like women couldn't even open their own credit card until 1974, 1975, it makes sense that the industry was dominated by men.
Yeah.
And so that's why you saw like super phallic, pink, veiny, rubbery products being designed, because a man was designing and they're like, well, of course a lady wants a penis as a sex toy. Whereas like the reality is the vast majority of women just need clitoral stimulation, which doesn't need to be phallic shaped or anything. It can be quite small. It can be
Could be
quite
round
compact.
or whatever.
It
Yeah.
can be very ergonomic. It can be elevated in design. And so all of a sudden, I think starting maybe around like the like 50 Shades of Grey, I think was actually a really weirdly like landshed moment where all of a sudden it was like sex was part of the cultural zeitgeist and different ideas around sex. And then you had, like a lot of women that were entering the space to design products where they were like, I think we can do a little bit better than this jelly, you know, huge, like battery operated, heavy, loud thing. And so there has been a lot of innovation, but I do think there's still a lot of innovation.
What I think is
left.
interesting with that is like if men were designing sex toys for a long majority of the time, they didn't do a very good job of designing sex toys for men.
Well, I have a whole like theory and thesis on like externality of sex organs and internality, and the fact that like for women, and I'm using broad terms here, but for people that have like a clit and vulva and all those and that anatomy, like your pleasure and arousal is all not visible. It's not like you can't physically see it. Whereas for people with penises, it's very visual. It's
quite
very
clear. Yeah.
It's very physical. And so I think in that way also, like, I mean, the clitoris wasn't even included in medical textbooks up until maybe like 110 years ago. Like it was just omitted.
Yeah.
It was just omitted. And so I think that there was less of a need, but I actually think what you're saying is true, which is that like, I don't know, this is what your conclusion is, but I do think that for men, that space is really lacking. Like the products that exist are also really bad.
I mean, I will claim a fair amount of ignorance. Like I haven't done much exploration of male sex
Okay,
toys.
but you've heard of a fleshlight.
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, and that's what I think.
And it's
right,
like,
right. Yeah.
Who even wants to clean that thing? Like I'm just talking like pure tactics here.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like I've heard flashlights. I've done plenty of like porn and sex toy shops in my life for a variety of reasons, you know. And like I find that, you know, even if you're just browsing around for fun, it's like, none of this stuff looks particularly
intriguing, inviting,
or like, and to the conversation we were having before, it all looks kind of cheap, even if it's expensive. It looks like something I wouldn't want to put my dick in that. You know what I mean? Like,
or you're just like, it's so hypersexualized, where you're just like,
right.
It makes you feel, I mean, and the reason I even got into this industry was I went through like a cancer diagnosis at a really young age, and I went through menopause at 21. And I went to go buy lube because I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm a 21-year-old who's menopausal. How cute. But like, I went to a sex toy store in Missouri, which was, as you can imagine, a hellhole.
Yeah.
And I remember just being like, I already feel so shitty that I have cancer and I'm going through menopause and this is really alienating and ostracizing. And like, now I have to walk through this awful store, through this, you know, like crotchless onesies and like crazy contraptions. And I just want something that's going to like help with this part of my life that I already feel self-conscious about. And I think like instead of acknowledging that most people feel very self-conscious about this whole part of our lives, these stores make it so that you feel like you have to be like a professional sex athlete to like to walk into them a little bit. And I personally find that intimidating. So
knowing what to buy, or
knowing what to buy, to also just like the array. I think a lot of the products in there, I think historically it has been very stigmatizing to go into a sex toy store.
Yeah.
And so they cater to the people that frequent that, which tend to be more experienced and tend to be more comfortable.
Experimental, perhaps.
But it's like our whole idea was like, okay, but like these products work for people and they make their lives better and they don't hurt anyone and they don't hurt anything. So like, why can't we create an entire market for anyone that's never bought these products? Because there's no denying that they work.
Right. Well, I'm curious, and you know, I don't know how open you want to be, but like, let's go back to you know, your Midwestern childhood, and you went to college in Ohio, right? Miami of Ohio. Yeah. So if you think about like, and I'll be honest too, like, I mean, look, all boys Catholic school, it wasn't much going on, you know, and certainly access to things was limited even in Boston, you know.
Oh yeah, a Catholic Boston? Are you kidding me?
I mean, the
I mean,
priest-
we could do a
the-
whole podcast episode about that.
The priests in the 80s and early 90s wasn't a great time.
Mm-mm.
But that was a different kind of access, I suppose. But I mean, I was head altar boy, but it doesn't matter.
Oh God, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay.
Yeah. But I have a lot of psychological things about not being touched, but but whatever. But I do think that like lack of comfortability and that lack of
Yeah.
education awareness. I mean, I think porn for me was like maybe 12 or 13 the first time I saw porn.
Mhm. Wait, was it VHS, DVD, or
It
was it?
It was VHS.
Okay, yeah.
and
Had
it-
to be.
and it was given to me or shown to me, whatever, by my uncle.
Oh my God, what a G. What did he say when he gave it to you? Was he
was-
like, listen, this has been handed down in the family for years. You got to take care of this.
he was like I was staying at my grandmother's house and he was living.
No,
oh
at
yes.
your grandma, oh my God, dude. The
and-
first time you
this is great. Yeah.
your uncle or your
It
grandma.
was so luckily it wasn't with him. I don't think it was. It was okay. So he
But
was
that's
living.
very common for people
Yeah.
of older generations where it would be like you had one VHS and
Yeah.
it'd be like,
He-
okay, we're all going to watch it.
He'd be like, he lived in the basement and I was staying with my grandmother for like a week in like the den,
Mhm.
and which to make it even more disturbing was my mom's old bedroom, whatever. And
Many layers,
he
many
was
layers.
and he was like, hey, there are like 3 videotapes without like sleeves next to the TV if you want to look at them. And one was like Debbie Goes to College, and I forget what the other 2 were. Thank you. I forget what the other 2 were, but it's good. Do we have a second drink now?
Oh yeah. Because we're doing the deep cuts.
Yeah. So I remember but I think I watched it. I think I may have watched it by myself for the first time, and then maybe.
But did you see it with him there? Like, were you
No,
like,
I'm
but he
trying
was
to
just like, look at it, and you're like, okay, I'll look
I think
at
he
it
was
later.
like, look at it like later, and then I feel like there was another time in that week where he may have been like sitting in the whatever, the Barca Lounge or Lazy Boy, and I was like sitting on the floor. It doesn't matter. But anyways, it goes back to like.
But those moments are like ingrained in your brain, right? When
Yeah.
you're first exposed to like what sex is, and it's like something we don't talk about as like a society, but it's so influential
Right.
of like what those early depictions are. And anyways.
I think college. This is what I want to get back to you.
Yeah.
Like college you were 10 years younger than me, so you got like, but college didn't change that much in those 10 years, I don't think. And I feel like maybe I'm wrong, but college was a great place to come to terms with your sexuality, at least when I was there. And I went to a liberal arts school in New England, so people were
Where'd you go?
Colby College.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Colby's the shit.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, you're good.
Yeah.
So coming back to you, like Miami of Ohio, I have a bunch of friends who went there before you, but I mean, do you feel like going into college or even in high school, like your relationship with sex was healthy, or were you,
No.
Yeah.
Not at all. I mean, to be honest, I had an abortion 3 days before I had to go to college, and I didn't tell my
Wow.
parents at the time. And I had gotten like the morning after pill. It was like a whole, and I harbored so much guilt about it for so long. And I never told anyone.
Afterwards.
Yeah, like when I got to college, I did not party. I did not go out. I did not have sex. I did not do anything because I felt like literally the woman in the Scarlet Letter where I was like, well, I can't. I'm a scorned woman.
Was
I
it
have
different
to-
in high school, if I can ask?
In high school, I think I actually had a more positive experience with sex in high school. I just didn't have any education. Like I liked having sex, but I didn't really know. I didn't have a ton of access to information. I had one boyfriend. It wasn't like I was like having sex with a lot of people, but
Yeah.
I just didn't. The naivete almost felt like really pure and honest of like, this is great. Like, why wouldn't I have sex?
Right,
And then
yeah.
I got pregnant and I was like, oh, this is why I wouldn't have sex. Because now I have to do this horrible thing
Yeah.
that is going to hang over me forever. And then it was it was like 4 months after I had, not even, it was like 2 months after I had the abortion that I started having like symptoms of cancer.
Ugh.
And I have no scientific evidence or anything factual for this, but like I do genuinely believe that the depression that put me in resulted in like my body reacting in a way that was like, I don't know.
So you think it wasn't the cancer, it was more like
No. I
psychological.
think I think immune system response and mental health are like so directly correlated in terms of like I was a mess of a human when I got to college. But it was the cancer diagnosis and like being confronted with like this reality of like, this is my body. And like, if I don't take control, because I think after that happened, I was very like, oh, like, I don't know like how to deal with this body anymore because I just had to do this terrible thing. And I think going through cancer made me realize like, I have to take agency over like my body, my pleasure, like whatever's going on, because no one else is going to do that for me. And that was a really liberating experience, but I had to go out and seek out that information around just like what is a lubricant? I didn't even know lubricant was a thing until I went through menopause. Like I was like, I thought that was for like when you had, I don't know, like a pap smear at like the OBGYN. Like I didn't know and because that information isn't provided, because we think that providing information, we're sexualizing children, teenagers, adults, whatever it is. I mean, I'm not saying we should, teach kindergartners about lubricant, obviously, but like, I just don't think information that is accurate and medically backed is harmful.
So how did you, in that situation, like, you said you were 21 when you went to that sex store, right? So the internet was available at that point, obviously. Is that where you turned to, or what did you do to kind of try to understand what can I do? Never mind like my sexual relationships with men, like my own sexual relationship myself.
Well, yeah, I like didn't even know I was going through menopause. My radiation oncologist was like, okay, we have to shrink the tumor because I had colorectal cancer, which is like the super sexy kind, which you 100% want when you're 21 years old and you're like, I'm living my best life, guys. I have poop cancer. But he was like, you're not gonna have kids ever because we have to beam the radiation through your reproductive organs. And I was like, okay. It stinks, but like I can't do anything about it and I want to live. But it wasn't until I was having like these horrible hot flashes and like all these symptoms where I was like, hot flashes, radiation, 21 years old, into Google, and it was like, oh, I'm going through menopause. Like no one told me that was going to happen.
Did the doctors even suspect it? No,
they knew. I think they knew, but I don't know why they didn't tell me. I think because for women, like, this is getting like Freudian, whatever, but like there's the Madonna horror complex of like they presented it as like, are you going to be a mother? Yes or no? Answer no. But like outside of that, we don't really talk about like pleasure in a way that is like part of a holistic well-being. And like even the advertising policies are written that way, where like contraception, okay, vibrators, not okay. Viagra, okay, even though that's both pleasure and procreation. But lubricant kind of borders on maybe we'll allow it, maybe we won't. If it's to start a family, yes. If it's to have an orgasm for women, no. And so I think I just realized like there's this huge gap in the middle of when I went online of like it's either all menopausal, here's like how not having estrogen produced in your body is going to be awful, versus like hypersexualization of going into like a sex shop in Missouri and feeling like, well, this is not what I was expecting. And so that was like kind of the catalyst for being like, I'm a normal person. And I feel like there could be something in the middle that isn't, so polarizing on either end.
When you walk into that store, and we're going to talk more about things after that, but and the way you describe it kind of as seedy, or maybe not intentionally, maybe it is intentionally so, but like, is there a person there who can guide you to the right thing?
I think it depends on where you are. Yes, the answer is yes. And let me tell you what, the people that work in the shops, especially in New York City, the most delightful, educational, kind, empathetic, they're wonderful. And I think a lot of that is me projecting how I felt at the time of being like, I felt I also had like a temporary ileostomy bag, which is like a colostomy bag.
Yeah.
So I'm walking in there and there are all these like sexy ladies, mannequins. And I'm like, it was just very isolating, but there are people in those stores that can help you, I think to varying degree, depending upon where you are and how comfortable you are talking to them.
Right. So when you go through this and have this experience, like where does that put you from a mental state of like, what you want to do with your life? I mean, you kind of, college is at this point kind of in the rearview mirror, right? Like you have to one assumes one has to have a career or has to work in some way. Like what drives you at that point?
Well, I was in college when I got diagnosed. I was a junior and I had to drop out and move back in with my parents. And as a result of that, I lost healthcare coverage because at the time it was before the Affordable Care Act passed. Go Obama. I don't care what anyone says. And so you were only able to be insured under your parents' healthcare plan if you were fully enrolled as a college student. I had to get radiation and chemotherapy every day, and I couldn't do that on my own in Ohio. And I'd have like massive like reconstruction surgery. And so I moved home with my parents, lost healthcare coverage. And I was so angry about that when I got through treatment, I went and worked for a senator on Capitol Hill.
Claire McCaskill?
Yeah, for Claire McCaskill. The short answer is like, I think having cancer made me realize life is really, really short. And like, you have nothing to be afraid of because the only thing to fear is death, really.
Yeah.
And once you kind of face that a little bit, you're like, all right, well, I've kind of like done battle with the beast. So like, what am I really afraid of? Like money? Like social stigma? I just had colorectal cancer. Like what more could they do? So I worked for a senator, found that disappointing because like I couldn't actually enact change. Like it was really frustrating to be on Capitol Hill. So then I went to the polar opposite where I worked in management consulting.
Deloitte?
Yeah, Deloitte, where I was like, I'm going to, work for private companies and see how like the private market really can also enact change. And it was a good experience, but it was just a brutal existence of life outside of work. Like I didn't get to see my friends. I was traveling all the time. It was just like really hard.
Let me ask you a question about that.
Yeah.
I've had a variety of guests over the years who have worked at Deloitte or McKinsey or whatever, and at about the same.
The McKinsey guys are way smarter, but go on.
No judgment.
We're the poor man's McKinsey. You guys need a bargain? We'll...
Also, Boston Consulting Group. BCG.
Also, also.
I have my own opinions about those companies, and I'll share them. But my question about it is you mentioned traveling a lot. Most of the people I've talked to that have that have done that, that have had those jobs come in it when they're like 22, 23, 25 maybe. And the thing I've always find fascinating about it, and I try to ask anyone who works in them this question, is like, what the hell do you do at 25? And that's not your fault. It's them. They're hiring you. But what do you know at 25? What does a person know at 25? It's not cynical on my part. I'm just really curious that like says, okay, I can go into this company.
Oh, nothing.
Okay.
You know nothing. But through whatever aptitude filters the firm has, whether that's like what you majored in, what your GPA was, where you went to school, who your dad was.
Economics, yeah.
Yeah, economics and then Spanish. But like
classic combination.
Classic combo. But like you're just willing to work your ass off.
Yeah.
And the firm knows that. And and they'll pay you. I mean, this was my first job was at Deloitte in 2010. And I remember my starting salary was $65K a year with a $10K signing bonus. And I was like, I'm rich. I'm rich. Watch out, everybody.
Yeah.
I'm a millionaire. And like, and in turn for that, you will work 100 hours a week. Like you'll work these insane hours. But I do think there's a lot of benefit because you learn a ton.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like I got to work for like TIA, Cref, and Citibank, and Pfizer, and like really interesting businesses where I got to sit in a conference room where, these C-level executives are like, everything's crashing and burning to the ground.
Right.
And it's a really good place to actually like foster entrepreneurship, to see like, well, where did they fuck up? And like, why did that happen? And like, how can I learn from this in my future? But like, it's the same as any high paying junior job. They're not paying for your experience. They're paying for your like intellectual capabilities, so to speak, and your willingness to like sacrifice any semblance of personal life or work-life balance.
But how long if you started there in 2010?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about that timeline between, and I know
it
there
was
was
not
a job.
long. It was not long.
Yeah. So you feel like you learned a lot. Like, was it learned a lot to add value at the time, or learned a lot, do you think, for you to add value to your like career as you went forward after that?
Oh, both. I mean, I was ranked the #1 consultant. Like I killed it.
Humble brag.
No, because here's the thing. I came from this public shitty school. I remember like they had like an opening mixer, and there was this girl that was like, Miami of Ohio, is that even like a school? And I was like, what do you mean? Is it even? She like, because it was like Yale, Harvard, like it was just MIT. It was like all these really, really like, I felt like I was out of my league. And after like 2.5 years, I really would sit down because I'm like a very inquisitive person. I'd ask the partners, and I'm like, do you like it? Like, do you like what you're doing? Are you happy? And they're all divorced. They're all on the road constantly. They're all clearly really miserable.
Right.
And it's like at that point in the consulting firms, you either have to go to business school or you have to find another job.
Which is what most of my conversations have been. They go from there to business school.
Well, I told the head of the program, I was like, look, and I was older too, because I had to drop out of college because of cancer. And so I was like, I don't want to go to business school this old and then come back at like 30 and then I have to work here for another 2 years to pay off, because they'll pay for your business school, but that means it's conditional. You have to go back and work at the firm for 2 years. So I was like, well, I'm going to be, pretty old by the time I pay off this debt. And I remember I made a point to interview like 10 different partners and senior managers. And the number one question I asked is like, what did you get from business school that you could not have gotten had you not gone? Every single one of them, like 8 out of 10, had the exact same answer, which was network. I have a network. And I was like, I feel like I can build a network without incurring $200,000 to $250,000 debt. So anyways, I left consulting because I just didn't, I saw it and I was like, this isn't the life I want.
Right. So I know you went to Grouper, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
R.I.P.
Well, it's interesting to me that like the trajectory is, this like challenge of like trying to figure out your relationship with sex and yourself in this corporate world then, and then you move to what I would say is the beginnings of a career in the world of wellness, hopefully. So what was Grouper for people who don't know?
Oh my God, Grouper was the best. I cannot, to anyone listening anywhere, please create a copycat of this company that failed. It was 3-on-3 dating. It was 2 anchors, was what we called them, would sign up. Well, it was, a guy and a girl, hypothetically speaking. We also did guys on guys, girls on girls, whatever. And then each person's responsible for bringing 2 wingmen or wing women or wing people. And then we would match them. And so when you would show up, it would be you and 2 of your friends, and then 3 people that are potential dates, who we called a Grouper Social Club. And it was completely blind dating. So you would show up, we would make a reservation for you. It was $20 per grouper, and your first drink is included. So it's like a really good anchor price. Like you're showing up, there's a reservation, you're meeting 3 people that like have been selected for you. And like for $20, I think that's a pretty compelling, who wants to swipe all? But this was before Tinder and all of that existed, really.
Oh, really?
I mean, it existed, but it wasn't in the cultural zeitgeist the way it was. I mean, I joined in 2012.
Okay.
And so I feel like Tinder really blew up in 2013, 2014. But it was just, we were on like the Time startups to watch, like, and we went through Y Combinator, like it was like a wild ride. One of the co-founders is Tom Brown, who's like one of the most lovely people of all time, who's also a co-author of ChatGPT and now a co-founder of Anthropic. Like it was just really smart people trying to solve like a really inherently difficult problem that people like to pretend isn't a problem, but like who enjoys dating?
Right. Yeah, no one.
And I love that idea of like, how can we utilize technology to solve something that's like stigmatized, especially online dating was really, at the time it was like, oh, I'm not going to use Match.com because that's desperate, you know?
Right, yeah. I think there was like a younger generation using like OkCupid. There was Match, obviously. Tinder came out. What was the eHarmony was the one that's depressing because it could tell you there's no one for you. But
it was very stigmatized.
Yeah.
It was like, this isn't cool. Like I'm signing up for online dating because like I literally can't find a date by myself.
Right.
And our whole motto was like, we didn't even call it dating. We were just like, we're going to introduce you to 3 people that live in your city. And so it was really fun because it was like people that had, moved somewhere after college and didn't know. And I loved Grouper so much.
So you're in New York City.
Yeah.
Okay. So did you come to New York City for McKinsey or no,
I
Deloitte?
wasn't smart enough for McKinsey.
So Deloitte. Sorry, Deloitte.
Yeah. No, I came to New York.
Old-fashioned talking.
Yes, I came to New York for Deloitte, and then was like, I don't want to go to business school. I have to find somewhere to work. And I actually went on a Grouper. I just gone through a terrible breakup, and I went on a Grouper, and it was such a great experience that I was like, I have to work. I was like, I think this is like literally revolutionary. Like it was so seamless. You would get a text message that was like, here's your reservation and your time. And like, we created all this technology for like intimate, like immediate SMS technology that would be like, so you could literally text and be like, they don't have our reservation or like something's weird. And we had a team that would like call the restaurant and like there was a lot of magic that was involved that felt really like special.
And so from that Grouper experience you had, you were like, I need to go work there?
Yes.
How do you manifest that?
I'm like a bulldog when it comes to that stuff. Like I just called and applied. And weirdly enough, someone who you interviewed, Lauren Lito.
Oh God, text from last night.
Yes. So
Love
this
Lauren.
is going to be like, just go with me on this. So Lauren dated a guy in that era, like 2012, 2013, that was from St. Louis, who I knew through a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And Lauren and Michael knew each other, I think through BetaWorks, maybe when like Grouper was first starting.
That sounds right. Yeah.
But like, one of the co-founders of Grouper knew Lauren, and I remember I like begged Michael, who was the guy she was dating at the time. I was like, please, will you ask her to send like a rec email or anything? And God bless her, she did. And we knew each other, but like not super
By the way,
well at the
another
time.
super nice human being.
Oh, Midwesterners are the best, by the way, in general.
Totally.
She's lovely and amazing and wonderful. But like, that's how the world works, is like, you just have to be like, I can get to this person. That's how I raised BC Capital, was like, how do I just ask for the thing I need?
Right.
Which is very hard to do.
It is. I mean, unless you have that kind of personality, which is.
It's not, but not innate. It's not innate.
It's a learned thing.
Don't you think?
I think, yeah. I think that you, well, I think it's somewhat a part of you to have the guts to know that the worst thing that can happen is that they'll say no.
Yeah.
You know, and
to know that's not the worst thing that can happen.
It's not. But like,
because it's like, who gives a shit?
Right. They say no, you move on.
Great.
I mean,
yeah.
I think for a lot of, like, it's funny because you go back to dating in Tinder, like, or other things. I think for a lot of guys who play numbers games, the worst thing I'm a terrible, like, that's not how I'm like a serial monogamist.
Oh, I can tell you so much about dating statistics that will make you literally want to like stab your eyes out. Like,
oh, I want to make me want to stab my eyes out, and more importantly, make them want to stab their eyes out.
Well, it's just I when Tinder first came out, so Grouper did really well.
Yeah,
we were crushing it.
Wait, so what was your job there? Let's speak.
I worked on customer experience, but then I also worked on building the dating algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
Which was the most interesting job I've ever had, which was like studying how do you build an algorithm with variables that get people to be attracted to each other. Is it attractiveness? Is it intelligence? Is it humor? Is it like background geography? Is it monetary status? Like, it was really fascinating to figure out, how do you weight those? How do you evaluate them? How do you put a numerical value against such a subjective variable?
Yeah.
But working there, yeah, it was really fascinating, but it was also really depressing, because I think my biggest takeaway was people have very unrealistic expectations around dating.
What do you mean?
Just people, when you build that algorithm numerically based on a variable of factors and the ability to evaluate those factors, which isn't easy, because you have to use like comps for like, how do you evaluate how smart someone is? You look at, things that aren't perfect as
Was this
variables.
like an onboarding process thing, or how did you do it at group?
Onboarding.
Okay.
So like you would figure out, so like when someone would onboard, I should not be saying this, but the company's failed, so I don't think I'll get sued.
And you want someone to steal it.
So, so like when someone would onboard, we'd have to manually rank these variables as the CX team, which was the team I oversaw. And like when I joined, I did that myself. And then my like match rates were like insanely high. Like my ability to like assign variables and then like match people on variables, like I had like a really high rate. So they're like, oh, you should work on the algorithm. And I was like, yeah, I know. But it was like, you would look at it was when Facebook's cache system was open.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could download cache photos without, and then they closed that off, and that's why the company failed. But like those photos, we had people that would literally go through the photos and be like, how attractive are they? How social are they? You would look at what school they went to, what their job, like all of these subjective variables, and they'd be assigned a number, and then they would get like an overall ranking of like what is, and I know that sounds awful, but that's how, guess what, all dating apps work.
Well, it's algorithms. That's all it is.
All dating apps, when you get on an app and you're swiping, guess what? You have a number that puts you in a rank that shows like who you're getting matched with.
Yeah. So you should have this onboarding process. Sorry, I never used it. I didn't, but from what I understand, so you wouldn't do something where you're swiping. It would be like you're matched with this one person.
No, you would onboard. That's what was like part of the magic, was like you would onboard, and then you would sign up for a day. This was the hardest thing from just like a math perspective, was like, do you have someone pick a day first, or do you have them pick a match? Because what's so difficult in New York that we
Oh.
all know is scheduling.
Yeah, sure.
And so what would happen is we would have people pick the day with like economies of scale. It worked really well where you'd have like hundreds of people picking, because our value proposition was to bars actually, where it was like, we're going to guarantee you foot traffic on like a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, which are your historically slower nights.
Yeah.
You comp the first drink, and on average, 96% of groupers ordered like 3 to 4 rounds of drinks.
I feel like you guys had a relationship with my first bar.
What was it?
Destination. It was on 13th and A.
Probably.
And I feel like
I mean, there were so many bars because it was like guaranteed foot traffic and people that were going to drink a lot and like have a good time. And the business model was brilliant. I don't remember why I was talking about bars, but
because it's hard to schedule, get your first drink free.
oh yeah, you had to figure out like the pooling aspect. Are you pooling based on like best matches of being like, you guys are the best quality match? But we couldn't do that because people scheduling, especially because you have to bring in 2 other people.
Mm-hmm.
So people would sign up for a day, and then we would figure out how do we match them. Like, how do we send people messages being like, you're a good match? Like,
So truly blind dating. You don't even know who's coming in.
No, you had no idea. You had no idea. But we had all these fun prompts where it was like 2 truths and a lie, and you'd have to fill it out beforehand, and it made dating better.
It sounds wonderful. It sounds really cool. It sounds really cool.
No one has replicated it.
I maybe,
it's operationally a nightmare. I'll tell you that.
But I always think that like these kind of things, startups, half of what makes them work is the time, not just the idea. And maybe the time is back. Maybe
because then Tinder came out and people just wanted to swipe. And on the subject of like data that makes you want to like bulge your eyes out, less than 10% of people that had downloaded Tinder, because Hinge didn't even exist then.
Yeah.
Less than 10% had never met someone. But these were people that we had filtered that had spent a minimum of 8 hours a week on the app.
But Tinder is a hookup app, let's be honest. It didn't maybe it didn't
had a lot of evolutions, but at the time it came out, and this is like 2012,
No, I know. It was meant to be a dating app, but I mean,
it was a hookup app, but it was like ultimately with dating, that's what a lot of people are looking for.
But yours, it seems like Grouper was much more about that, and Hinge also about dating, not
connecting
about
with people,
yes,
with no expectations.
Yeah,
just like that was our whole thing. Was like we put so much pressure on finding the one. And that's not how love and relationships work. It's
totally.
I don't know. I just feel like every time I fall in love anecdotally, it's like when I'm not really looking for it. And when I'm like really happy as a person. And I think that was our philosophy. And that's why I loved so much of what Grouper was.
First of all, I love that way of framing it, because I think when you're a happier person, you're open to love, even though you're not looking
qualified to be in a relationship.
Yeah. If you're miserable, no one wants to.
Yeah, if you're just like, I want sex, like that's fine.
Yeah.
But like you're not probably a person you want to have a relationship with.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned that the Facebook caching thing is what and ultimately brought it down or
yeah.
So as it I hate to as it closes down, let's say, what are you thinking? Like, I know obviously the next thing that happens, but like, what do you think?
I got fired.
Oh, you got fired?
Yeah.
Not laid off.
No, I got fired. I was on my way to therapy because I had, oh God, I'm going to regret telling this story. But I had hired a friend. We were relaunching the app to do swipes because we were like, we have to, like, they're not willing to go on blind dates anymore.
Yeah.
So I'd hired a friend to do swipes. He was a recovering alcoholic. He relapsed that night. He punched my boss. He vomited on my boss. I had like gone out on a limb to be like, and I got fired the next day. So that was how that ended. But the company was also not doing great.
How are you doing at that point?
I was a mess. Yeah. I believe so much in this thing, and then market conditions change, and you're like, oh, I really thought that this was going to be like a model that worked and proliferated, and then it doesn't, and you're kind of like, okay, like the truths I thought to exist didn't pan out.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a reckoning of figuring out, like, what do I do next?
Right. So there you are in this situation. How does the opportunity at Unbound come, or is there anything before that? Or is it like basically Grouper to
No,
figuring it
it
out?
literally was Grouper. There was somebody that worked at Grouper who introduced me to Dave and Sarah Jane, and it was immediate. But it was like, we can't really pay you. So,
Which is always what you want to hear when you.
but I believed in it. Like at first I was like, this is zany. Like, I can't believe I'm gonna meet with this like sex toy weird. It was a subscription box. They weren't making their own products. It was like, we're gonna source these and we're gonna send them. It was like the height of Birchbox, where it was like,
Oh, sure.
what if we did that for sex?
So Birchbox, the way their model worked was that they, for listeners, that they
yeah.
got all their samples for free when they started.
Yes.
And which proved to be not so scalable over time, but was a great model to start with. How were you guys doing it?
Well, it wasn't samples, but it was more so the model of like eliminating the paradox of choice of like, how do you send someone something maybe every 3 months that allows them to explore and like check the box of something that they're interested in, but maybe don't have the time, education, or capacity to like do the research, which is like sex toys is a category where like most people don't have the capacity to do the research.
Right.
That model didn't work for a lot of reasons, but I was like, this is a really viable. Like I'll never forget. I met with Sarah Jane and Dave, and they emailed me this market research report about the sex toy industry and about how big it was and how there were no brands that were really mainstream. And I remember I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading this report, and I was like, there is so much here. Like, how has no one built something better in this category?
Right. And so as you realize that the box system isn't going to work or whatever.
The subscription, because they're like durable goods. It's not a sample. It's like a vibrator.
Right. So
like, how many vibrators do you really need? Well, it's just like, it's a durable good. I'm an economist. You know what I mean? Like, where it's like they're consumables and they're durable goods, and it's a durable good, and a subscription for a bunch of durable goods is difficult to defend. And I think that's been a hard thing to figure out, honestly, as like a business model.
So that's like what I was like when I was thinking about this earlier, and we were talking about how people of the kind of younger generation are designing things for themselves, women especially. Like, as you move from we are taking other people's inventory and putting them in a box, sending them out, to we are going to make our own. That, I mean, now you're manufacturing goods and you're designing them.
Oh my God, it was so awful.
Yeah, what?
It was so awful. It was so awful.
How do you figure out how to do that? I always found that like manufacturing, like as a digital person, I'm like a physical good.
Don't
never
ever
mind
do it. Don't ever do it.
Yeah,
it's a nightmare. The first time, so I had this idea to make like jewelry forward accessories, because the most expensive part of like the motorized components, like the lithium-ion batteries, the motors themselves, the like PCB boards, like those are more expensive that exist in vibrators. So I was like, okay, well, what can we do? Because I was trying to raise venture capital.
Yeah.
Because at the time I was working for Tanuki Labs, which is the best dev shop of all time.
With Dave Wren's company.
Dave Wren's, the best,
Skiff,
and Eric Skiff, the best. To try to get the company off the ground as a subscription box. And I just realized I was trying to pitch VCs, and they're like, we don't invest in companies that are just like third-party sellers, which was effectively what we were.
Yeah.
So I was like, fuck, we have to like make our own products. And they were like, we're not going to invest in a company that has no track record of making its own products. Like, I'm a poor kid from the Midwest. I'm like, okay, well, let me figure out how to come up with like a couple, I don't know, like $5,000 to $10,000 to make an actual product to prove this to you. And so the only way I could do that was through jewelry. And I made these bangle bracelet handcuffs, because bangle bracelets were like really big right now. And they were like bracelets that also like transformed into handcuffs. Gorgeous. They got written about in all the PR. It was like a brilliant launch strategy. However, the manufacturing facility got hit with a tsunami. And so all of our inventory like was just like gone overnight. And I was like, oh no. And I'm like on Medicaid, like I'm like trying to pay my bills, and I'm like, I need this to work so that I can raise venture capital, so I can prove I can execute on this. And this makes me look like I can't execute at all. But it started there. I was able to figure that out. And then we slowly started making like SKU by SKU individually. And then I was able, when I started to show like there's a lot of growth and demand here.
But how did you like, okay, so you talked about earlier how designs of vibrators and dildos aren't generally made with the actual customer in mind.
Right.
So you guys clearly had a mission, or I'm guessing you did. Like
We do. We did. We always
you
would.
do. But at the time, your mission is like, okay, so we're not just making a vibrator. We're making a vibrator that's correct or right or
Yeah.
So do you do like research? Like, do you have designers?
Oh my
like,
God,
how do you like? How does that work?
I love it. So you have to keep in mind, I'm just coming off of like reading all this dating.
Right.
And this was an industry where I was even more fascinated. I'm reading Kinsey reports. I'm reading just like whatever data is out there. And most importantly, that I didn't expect, I was doing our customer service. I'm responding to every email. And the products are breaking. Like really high-end products are breaking all the time.
Yours are the ones you're seeing.
No, we weren't making products yet. So this is when we're still a subscription box and we're doing this part-time, and I'm working for Dave and Eric at Tanuki and I'm trying to make ends meet. But every day there are emails that are coming in that's like, I paid $200 for this Lilo vibrator and it broke. And I email the manufacturer and I'm like, hey, we bought a bunch of these from you. This is broken. The customer's upset. And they're like, well, we don't do
refunds.
And I'm like, what? And so we're eating these costs over and over and over and over again. And so then I go to a trade show as a buyer, and that's when I find out, that's when I found out about like the industry itself and like the Italian mafia background. And I learned that the VHS industry is a $5 million a year industry based solely on like truck drivers, because they still have VHS. Like all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, this industry is so antiquated. Like there's so much opportunity here.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I think we can make better products that are actually body safe, that also like are innovative enough that they're interesting and add value, but like not like $200. And so that was a nightmare to figure out how to source manufacturers, mostly in Shenzhen and China. But that was like the move we made, and we had to raise venture capital to do that because it was
right.
Which
so
took
you had
2.5 years.
Make prototypes or something, or how does that?
We couldn't. We 3D printed a lot to the extent we could.
Yeah.
But it took me, I had 300 no's from venture capitalists before I got my first yes.
That's a classic story. And sadly.
Vibrators really hard to be like, we're going to make this.
I think going back to the beginning of this conversation, I think venture capitalists, much like most of America, are uncomfortable investing in sex.
Yeah.
Just like they're uncomfortable investing in CBD and cannabis. There's just
and you look at OnlyFans and you look at like, I don't know, it's just like there's so much money.
Oh, I agree with you. When we were starting out, I'm trying to remember about like maybe in 2000, I want to say 13, like 2 years in, we worked on a Merkin product.
Oh my God, what?
Yeah, we had a Merkin product that one of our clients' wives, or now wife,
like a real one or like a joke one?
No, real, and then but also like interchangeable.
You have to explain for the audience what is a Merkin.
A Merkin is basically a toupee for a vagina.
Pubic hair. Toupee.
Toupee, yes, yeah.
Based on, you know what its origin is from?
It's from the medieval ages.
Yeah, but it's from people who had like syphilis and STIs and like different diseases where like their pubic hair no longer grew, and so they would use it.
Yeah.
As like a literal wow.
Ours was I don't like. So it wasn't a joke, but it was novelty in that we would have you could buy a variety.
We sold a Trump Merkin, so you don't have to explain to me. We had a Merkin that was amazing. Like it like had a comb over, and it was bleached, and it sold quite well.
I bet it did. Sorry, we digress. That's amazing. But we had to do a lot of prototypes anyways. That's my point. But
of a Merkin?
Well, you want to make sure, first of all, you don't want it.
Yeah, please go on. I want to hear this.
You don't want it to be too adhesive.
Correct.
Yeah. So, but you also don't want it to be not adhesive enough. There are things that we had to, we were only working on the design aspect of it and the brand aspect of it. We weren't working on the physical product.
Love this.
But my point was more about, so you have, at some point you have to build the thing to make sure it works.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you have to go to Shenzhen for that? Or like, how do you get
No, I didn't go to Shenzhen for that. I knew here's the thing that's so frustrating about my industry is like, it works. The product, like, I was like, product market fit. And I'm like, like we have a less than 2% return rate. We have less than 1% return rate for the last 3 years.
Amazing.
And we have if you're not happy with your product, if it breaks, if you don't like it, if anything happens, email us. No questions asked, returns, like refund, like we will refund you your money, because I genuinely believe that if something doesn't work for you, like I don't want that to further add to like your ability or inability to identify with what works for you sexually. Anyways, long story short, less than 2% return rate. And like, I still would talk to these VCs and they'd be like, well, I don't know. And the one valid reason they had, and that I still agree with and that I still fight every fucking day, is you can't advertise. So how are you going to scale?
And so how have you guys?
Organically, through TikTok, through having like a crazy, weird, like ethereal, like just a really like out there brand, but that is still authentic to us. But that's exhausting in 10 years to constantly be like, okay, well, like, how do we figure out like how to continue to grow organically? I think it's made us stronger, and like we've been profitable for a long time, but like it just is frustrating.
How do you, so how often do you come up with a new, or come out with a new SKU?
This year we're gonna come out with like 4 to 5. We used to come out with like 15 a year.
Wow.
But it was too much.
Do you retire them and like launch new ones, or does it?
Yeah. We've launched over 80 different original products, and we have like 30 on our site now. So it's a constant evolution, and I love that relationship of being like, it was great, we loved it, it did its, it served its time, and now it's done.
So this goes back to when we were talking about before the mics came on, about kind of the wellness aspect and like in serving, your customer. So like you mentioned before, not most people don't need a variety of vibrators or sex toys or whatever.
I mean, I have like probably like a 40.
You might be an exception and you're
but
in
I'm
the
just
business.
Saying, I'm saying like there's a season to everything,
Fair enough. But
yeah, no, like you don't need a bunch.
But I think one of the things that what I was driving at is that you're like, what you guys I think tend to do well is try to find the right thing for the person. Is that correct? So how did you get to that point in the company where you're like, okay, now we have enough SKUs, and even if we're changing them out every now and then, we can say, okay, person X comes into the showroom or calls you or does something online, say, you know what, this is the right thing for you versus this one versus something else? Or how, like, what's the...
I don't think you can ever tell someone explicitly what the right thing is for them, but I think you have empathy and you like ask like, well, what are you looking for and where are you coming from? And most of it just has to do with like strength, intensity, and then just like lifestyle of like, is it important for you for it to be waterproof? Which like actually all of our products are, but is it important for you for it to be like small and compact, or do you want something? Do you want it for just masturbation or coupled sex? Or, I mean, there are a lot of important questions, but I actually take a lot of pride because I think one of the biggest gaps in the industry was like, you used to email customer service and like you'd be lucky if you got a response, and like ours, we have a less than 24-hour response time, like, and they're real people that are like there to help you figure out like, what do you like? And it's very easy over time to distinguish between the people that are like being trolls and just trying to like maybe be sexually explicit, of which there are a lot, and then the people that are really just like, I've never bought this before and I'm trying to figure out, and it's a really intimidating navigating experience.
I think that's a good point you make, and I know we're running out of time. I think that it's really easy to make light of or to be trolly and or creepy in this world of
because we're self-conscious about it.
Well, that, but also there are creepy people,
True, but but all the creeps, I think it always stems back to like, it's so hard to give empathy to those people because they're creepy and they don't deserve it, but also they deserve it because more often than not they're creepy or they're assholes because like they've been through something that makes them that way. Do you think?
But I do. I think however we define creepy, I think whoever we are as people is an amalgamation of everything that came before that to us, right? And so I don't necessarily believe that a person was born a certain way. And when it comes to creepiness, other things, yes.
Yeah.
But like creepiness, I don't know. So sure, but like, I mean, you were telling me that if I can say this, like people, like a guy came to your showroom and wanted to buy a sex doll.
Oh yeah. Oh, we had shout out to Gorgias, Gorgias. They're a customer, they're CX platform, they're amazing. We were one of their first customers, and they integrate with like Shopify, they integrate with all these things. They make customer service. Like, I worked in CX for a long time, and it is such a thankless, such a difficult job where people treat you like shit every day. And we would get people that would send in pictures and be like, hey, this product doesn't work for me. Can you get a look? Can you take a look at what's not working? And then it'd be like a very sexually explicit photo of like their penis or like what. It's always a penis. I'm going to be honest. It's not women that are sending that in. And we emailed them and they're like, hey, this is really weird. This is a really weird. I don't mean to laugh, but like, it's a really weird request, but like, is there any way you can build a filter so that if there's a flesh colored attachment photo, that there can be like an alarm, an alert, and they built that for us.
Because that's the thing you have in this industry.
But yeah, because like it was like, I don't want our customer service representatives to look at dick pics.
Right.
They shouldn't be exposed to that. And they were like, and they took it seriously, and they were like, yeah, we'll do that, and they built it, and so now there's like literally a flag that comes up where if there's a dick pic that's sent, like there's a flag that's like, don't open this attachment.
Well, that seems like
and
a
that's,
benefit.
I don't mean to laugh. It just is like, sometimes you're like, this is my job is to talk to these software developers to be like, can you create a mechanism that prevents dick pics?
I think there are a lot of people who would like to use that in their everyday life. So, you know, I think that's a good place to end it. Cheers. Thanks so much.
That's it for this episode of Story in a Bottle. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review for us in the iTunes store or wherever you listen. I'd like to thank our producers at 1459 Production Management and Charming Robots Eric Bowie for his continued production support.
And of course, I'd like to thank my guest, Polly Rodriguez, for graciously giving us her time.